I'm Bill Kassel, and this is Free Expression. This program is all about conveying the Christian message from a Catholic point of view and defending the liberty which makes it possible to do that. We examine overseas charity, contrasting how government has been exporting the sexual revolution, while a faith-based approach meets basic human needs. Join us, sit back, and enjoy some free expression. Jennifer Roback Morse heads the Ruth Institute, a Louisiana-based organization that studies sex, gender, pro-life, and other moral issues. She recently distributed a commentary on President Trump's scrutiny of the U.S. Agency for International Development. USAID funds a wide variety of projects around the world, which the media commonly represent as humanitarian relief. And indeed, some of its efforts do have positive impact in nations where health, safety, and education are inadequate. But USAID also exerts enormous influence on its recipient nations, an influence that doesn't always reflect the Judeo-Christian moral values America claims to champion. Dr. Morse describes that influence as cultural manipulation or even ideological imperialism. She's spoken with us before, and she's here now to examine the current controversy about USAID. Jennifer, thanks very much for being with us again.
Thanks for having me on, Bill.
Now, as you said in your, what was really a press release, a number of USAID programs have been examined by Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency team. The focus has been primarily on waste, but many of these programs seem to be mostly about sex and gender. If you would lay out some of the points you raised in your release.
Well, yes, I responded immediately to that, to the whole flurry of information that was coming out, and more information is coming out on a daily basis, but of course, U.S. taxpayers are rightly concerned about waste and fraud, and people are concerned about the fact that some of the money has gone to media outlets to basically turn media outlets into not journalistic reporters of the news, but more propaganda arms. So there's plenty to be worried about with USAID. But what jumped out at me, Bill, because of the work we do here at the Ruth Institute, was the number of these projects that simply export the sexual revolution to countries around the world that do not want it. And I know this because we've been tracking this type of stuff for years, that countries in Africa and Latin America and so on, they're not keen on LGBT takeover of the schools, They're not keen on abortion. They're not keen on contraception and some of the things that are being promoted. And so my antenna were up. And even on the very first day when Trump started talking about this, the thing that came out of the White House on February 3rd, I think it was, the list of things that he just rattled off on his whole laundry list of things that were ridiculous and malicious were these whoppers, I would say. $1.5 million to, quote, advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces. $70,000 for the production of a DEI musical in Ireland. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. $32,000 for transgender comic book in Peru. And in Guatemala, $2 million for sex change operations and LGBT activism. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just what was on Trump's opening salvo there that he listed along with a bunch of other stuff, And looking into it more, you realize USAID has been promoting the use of Depo-Provera, which is what is called a long-lasting so-called reversible contraception. They've been promoting that for years, Bill. And there are now serious health concerns about that. And USAID is just going on its merry way, subsidizing these shops and promoting them in third world countries. And so I think the American taxpayer needs to be aware that USAID is also financing and exporting the sexual revolution And Catholics in particular, and pro-life people in particular, need to be aware that it's not just that these third world countries are dying to have more abortion or dying to have more contraception. They're looking at us saying, America's lost its mind. We don't want to be like America. Get out of here. Leave us alone, and yet this is a large part of the funding that comes through USAID.
It's become rather commonplace for us to expect these wild ideological visions to be brought forth on college and university campuses or activist organizations here domestically, but this is an overseas operation. This is essentially a representation of American life to people in other countries. Why? Why did that happen? What's driving this in that particular arena, do you think?
Oh, gosh, Bill, this goes back a long time. Henry Kissinger was the first person, and Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon were the first people to have so-called population policies in the United States as part of U.S. foreign policy. Kissinger believed that the only way to prevent poor countries from becoming communist was to help them slow the population growth. And so it became part of U.S. foreign policy to try to limit births overseas, And some of the things over the years that have been done have been, terrible, in my opinion. And they're certainly interfering with the self-determination of the countries that are receiving these monies, And so now, if you look around the world, there are very few countries that have above replacement fertility, and now people are all of a sudden wondering, well, what's going to happen when population starts to decline? Well, these geniuses never asked themselves that question for the decades that they've been trying to get people to have fewer babies. So this attitude that the United States has the right and the duty somehow to steer the family policies of countries around the world, that idea has been in place for a long time, and it's a bipartisan thing. So I'm very glad to see some billionaires, for once, Elon Musk and Donald Trump, who don't think there are too many people in the world, because traditionally it was John D. Rockefeller III, Bill Gates, George Soros, these kind of people who are all, there are too many people in the world, we got to do something about it, And so now finally we have somebody who's saying, hey, if a nice lady in Burkina Faso wants to have a fourth child, that's okay. We should not be messing with her and shaming her or pressuring her government or anything like that. This needs to stop. So that's what I was calling attention to in the article, in the press release that you got, and that has since turned into an article, a full-length article at the National Catholic Register that's already generating quite a bit of comment.
It's been alleged that USAID has been either an official arm of the U.S. intelligence network or at least has worked at the behest of the CIA. What's your feeling on that? Do you think that's plausible?
I don't, Bill, I can't comment on that. I don't know anything about that. It wouldn't surprise me, but that's only because nothing would surprise me. That's not the same thing as knowing for a fact, right? But what I know for a fact is that USAID has been a part of U.S. foreign policy to basically interfere in the cultures of other countries to get them to reduce their birth rate, which means changing the way in which they see marriage and family, changing the way in which they see human sexuality. I call that ideological imperialism. This is our country trying to impose its view of the good life upon other countries in a way that benefits us, not necessarily them, not necessarily pursuing their values and their idea of what they want their country to be, And so that I know for a fact, and there's no question that USAID has been a big player in that arena.
I don't endorse it necessarily, but I can at least understand that if you are convinced that the world's situation can be improved by reducing the population, you would act on that. I mean, that makes a certain kind of perverse sense to me. But when you start getting into like the LGBT ideology area, that becomes harder to explain. It's taken hold here because we have a certain measure of freedom to speak and pursue whatever agenda you have in mind. But to integrate that into our foreign policy seems a very odd thing, especially in those countries that have extremely traditional values.
You're very right about that, Bill. And in fact, I was relieved to see very early on new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, made a statement that no longer will pride flags fly over U.S. embassies anywhere in the world. That will not happen. That will not happen in June. It will not happen ever. And I don't know how many of your listeners are aware, but U.S. embassies have been flying pride flags around the world at different times, and as you say, in countries that have extremely conservative and traditional family values. And so it's the government has been taken over, in a sense, by the most radical kind of ideologues, of people who are promoting a very specific vision of human sexuality and what it means in our lives. And if you look at it from that perspective, Bill, the pro-abortion agenda and the pro-LGBT agenda, they fit together better than you might think. I'm sure many of your listeners have been sidewalk counselors outside abortion clinics. And if you have listeners who have done that, and have done it very often, many of them have had the experience of people honking at them and flipping them a bird, and being mean to them, right? Being mean. And sometimes it'll be gay men who are all mad about abortion. And you ask yourself, well, why? Why would gay men care about abortion? You would think they would be the least likely people on planet Earth to ever need abortion. Right. But the reality is that what holds those groups together is they have a common vision of what human sexuality is about. Their vision is that sex is a recreational activity with no moral significance. It is presumed to be a sterile activity. We have a right to act as if sex is always sterile, right? We built our whole society around that. And so Planned Parenthood and the gay rights groups and USAID are united in the idea that that's the right way to look at sex. And other people around the world, and of course all traditional Catholics, look at that and go, wait a second, that is a really absurd view of human sexuality when it comes right down to it, right? Because sex actually does make babies, just for the record. Sex actually does make babies, and it brings husband and wife, mother and father together for the good of the family. Right. Human sexuality touches many aspects of human life, and to see it as a consumer good, oh, this is something I do for fun, as opposed to something that builds the family, that's a huge rift between the Catholic vision of human sexuality and what seems to be the mainstream view now. And what I've been arguing for quite a few years by now, in my book, The Sexual State, I argue that the sexual revolution has been largely financed and promoted by elites who have a particular view of human sexuality. It's not something that bubbles up from the grassroots. There aren't people running around saying, gee, I want transgenderism for my kids. That's what I'm looking forward to. And that's very obvious for this case. But if you look back in history, you'll see that in one episode after another of the sexual revolution, it comes from the top down. And USAID pumping money all over the world in their little projects here and their little projects there, and some of their big projects over somewhere else, and their silence over China's one-child policy for all those decades, right? U.S. foreign policy has been, sadly, a force for the promotion of the worst parts of the sexual revolution. And that's how the moving parts fit together, Bill, right? It might seem like LGBT stuff has nothing to do with abortion, but there is an underlying coherence to their vision, and that's what they're promoting.
Well, it's clear that this worldview has deeply permeated the American foreign policy establishment. Do you think USAID can be reformed? There, talk about folding it into the State Department and all of that. Can it still be a useful instrument in terms of overseas aid and advancing the image of the United States, or does it really have to be just eliminated?
I am not privy to the details enough to be able to say that with certainty. But I would put it this way. The things they're doing that are worthwhile can be done some other way. If the agency is as corrupt as it appears to be, then I do think burning the whole thing down and starting over, that's a case where that may be what, really what has to happen, that it has to be, you got zero-based budgeting, as they say. Every line has to be justified. And you don't just assume, since we did it last year, we're going to do it again. Since we have this program, we're going to do it again. I'm sure you can't do that. But some of their programs may be salvageable.
Well, now, once again, the expanded version of your essay in the National Catholic Register, is that running currently, or how can people track that down?
Right now, I'm looking at it here. It's on the homepage. It's right at the top. It was published, I guess, yesterday, on Thursday, the 13th. So people should be able to find it pretty readily. And also at the Ruth Institute, we'll have it posted along with a video interview that I did several years ago with the head of the Kenyan Catholic Doctors Association, talking about what some of this stuff has meant in the country of Kenya.
Jennifer Roback Morse, the Ruth Institute. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate your insights. This is very much a hot topic right now, and anything that people can absorb to help them evaluate what's going on is extremely valuable.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Bill. I really appreciate that.
Like many people, I receive solicitations from international charities, and 2 or 3 times a year, my parish is visited by missionaries who tell of their work in impoverished lands and ask for support. It's difficult for us, living in a nation so highly developed economically, to grasp the distress in which some people live, but it is real. Cross Catholic Outreach is an organization trying to meet human needs around the world. It reflects the call of Christ to help the poor, and it's officially recognized by the Church. Michelle Sagarino is president of CCO, and she's with us. Michelle, thanks very much for taking time to share your mission.
Oh, thank you, Bill. That's one of my favorite things to do, so thank you for being such an ambassador and a great partner for our ministry.
Let's look at the big picture first. In this day of global trade and instant worldwide communication, why is it that some countries remain so mired in poverty while other societies are able to thrive?
That's the golden question, isn't it? I guess as our Bible shares with us, the poor will always be with us, and you see many reasons of why some areas are thriving and some are not. Oftentimes, of course, it can link back to the government, link back on the misuse of resources or the abuse of coming in and using countries' resources, strife within the country, war. Many, many things can impact it. I can say, though, that although there are such varying degrees of poverty for reasons that even our top economists can't always fix, that our church is there. Our church is in the center, and they are doing amazing things to impact lives all around the world. And Bill, in some of the very worst situations, right? I don't want to say worse places, but worse situations with obstacles that are so huge. And at Cross Catholic, we're just pleased and honored that God called us to be supporting our church, the priests and the nuns and the Catholic lay people that are called to these developing worlds to make a difference.
I recently received a solicitation from you that talked about a project aimed at digging wells and supplying fresh water. That seems to be a common theme. Whenever a missionary comes to visit our parish, they always talk about the need for water. Why is that a chronic problem?
Well, within our ministry, we do have many various sectors or approaches to aid, from feeding and providing food to housing, education, Catholic education, and, of course, water. And we find that working within 33 countries around the world, supporting over 296 programs of our church, we find that water is one of the very first interventions or aspects of life that are needed before you can build upon the others. For instance, we felt this past couple years God calling us to deepen our support, as you just talked about in the Water for Life campaign, to deepen our support in sub-Saharan Africa. And if you think about it, that area, it's 57, I think, or close to that, % of the world's poorest live there. And 319 or 318 million people do not have access to clean drinking water. So you can see right there that those facts are just unbelievable and unacceptable. And so I think that when you talk to missionaries in the field, oftentimes water is so critical to start with, because if you don't have water, a little girl or a woman, the water carriers of the world, are often walking 5-6 hours sometimes to go to get water from a pit, from a local reserve that isn't clean even. And so with that time being spent, I don't know, really, children don't have an opportunity to get an education, right? And families that are walking that far, that impacts how they can provide funds to support their family. So it, to me, is the basis. I should say it's the next step after our faith to really transformation, right? Because we believe in holistic transformation, holistic approach. The spiritual and the material together is what makes the impact.
I see in your materials that you really stress developing self-sufficiency in these societies, and the water situation would seem to illustrate part of the problem. I mean, is it a matter of getting people to work together to dig wells? I mean, certainly digging wells is an ancient practice. It dates from the earliest days of civilization. Why isn't that being done spontaneously?
That's also a very good question. Let's take in Kenya. We could provide a water system or a water well that could impact 10,000 people. That means instead of walking all those hours, as I suggested, or perhaps paying a water truck, way out within the tribe to come, and it's not even affordable, right, for them to get water there. This is providing the water. How do you have a community, like you said, gathering where people are really empowered? Well, what we do is we have water trainings. We have groups come in and share. Why is it important to have clean water? What does that look like? And we have water committees. So the community is working together to be able to figure where the well should go, often on church property, so it's not contested by anyone where the water is, who will run the water tower, and what fees will be charged. Because part of that self-sufficiency is really having that agency that everybody wants to participate in the provision of water. So although these wells are huge and couldn't be dug as some of the hand wells you suggested could be, they really are a community effort. And they continue to be that way throughout the life of the water well, so that if there is a break, the community has paid towards that water so that it can be fixed. So I guess the answer is it's stair-stepping, right? Just like we do. Like, you can't have self-sufficiency right away. It's providing that base to then have water for the future.
One of the things that impresses me about your organization is that you're really a hands-on outfit. You're out in the field. You're working directly with the people. A lot of these charities have a different approach. They seem to be trying to leverage the resources of governments, and it kind of separates it from the human factor of charity.
We mobilize the global Catholic Church to transform the poor and their communities materially and spiritually for the glory of Jesus Christ. So although we have a few people in each country supporting, what we believe is that God called Father Glenn Moe in Cobanal, Haiti, or Bishop Martin in Malawi, or Father Fabian in Kenya. He called them. And we want to come alongside of those leaders of our church, that they know the community They know what is needed. They know the people. They can create those committees, that involvement, and we come along and support them long term. So it's not just a grant here, build a water tower, build a home. No, it's a partnership long term that we have with them so that they can say, this is what's needed, and we can come alongside of them. And how we do that is really mobilizing the church here as well. So it's reciprocal, right? We want to be part of transformation and helping those vulnerable brothers and sisters, and we hope that cross-Catholic outreach is a way, a trusted way, that you can answer God's call to then support those missionaries. This is, to me, and that I'm excited about this point, it's not only impactful to support those that are already there, but it is efficient. 94% of all of our ministry expenses, including all the donated goods, the food, the roofing, the medicines, it goes directly, 94%, to help the poor. So we think that's an effective model.
Yeah, that's a pretty impressive statistic, because a lot of people are concerned that when they give money to a group, it winds up going toward administrative expenses and other kinds of things that really don't get to the people that are in need.
I agree, and I can see how people would think, where does that go, right? In a big black hole, where does it go? But it's important to know, isn't it? You don't give for the glory of giving, but you want to know that where you're giving is where God calls you to give to. When someone gives to our organization, it's very important to us. It's one of our core values is we believe in good stewardship and updating them. So as we are working in last year, over $406 million went to 33 countries, we're able to tell Bill, hey, this is where your funds went, and this is what God did with that. And I think that's a beautiful story to tell, and it's something people deserve to know.
Well, where can people go to find out more about your organization and its work and possibly make donations?
Sure. You can go to crosscatholic.org and look at our ministry work and is calling you to a particular area, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Kenya, or you can see if it's a particular area of aid, like housing or water or food.
Michelle Sagarino, Cross Catholic Outreach, and once again, that URL is crosscatholic.org. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Be with us next time when we explore other aspects of religious communication and look deeper into the great Christian heritage of free expression. Free Expression with Bill Kassel is a production of Good Shepherd Catholic Radio and Company Publications, where good books, good music, and good radio are always good company. Dan Curris provided technical assistance. Theme and incidental music are by Dan Adam. The program was produced and directed by Bill Kassel. This is Good Shepherd Catholic Radio.